Are you ready to become awesomer? Hello everyone, my name is Umar Hamid. I'm your host on the No Limit Selling podcast, where industry leaders share their tips, strategy, and advice on how you can become better, stronger, faster. Just before we get started, I've got a question for you. Do you have a negative voice inside your head? We all do, right? I'm going to help you remove that voice in under 30 days guaranteed. Not only remove it, but transform it. So instead of the voice that sabotages you, there's one that propels you to much higher levels of performance and success. There's a link in the show notes. Click on it to find out more. All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Today I've got the pleasure of having Jeremy Pope, who could be the Pope of Sales, on the program today. Jeremy, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Jeremy, one of the things you said before we went on air is that, half of your job, maybe more of it, is therapy, because what stops people from executing at a higher level is usually right here in their mindset.
It is. Sales therapy is what I call it. I'm not a therapist, but
you play one on TV.
Right. I've done an awful lot of fixing broken offers and fixing funnels and fixing sales calls. And that's kind of what I do with Sales Call Overhaul. We break down problem spots in sales calls, and then we fix them. And on the podcast, we fix them on the air by reenacting that sales call.
I love it because, there's nothing quite as powerful as working with something real rather than something theoretical.
Yeah.
So tell me about the offer, because oftentimes, I'm just writing a sales letter right now, and I'm having to continually go back and recraft it because we know what we're selling, but oftentimes you don't know what other people are buying. And there's a disconnect between what we think and who's way more important than us, our customers, what they think. So give me an example of maybe someone you helped, what offer they had, and how you got them to clarify that message.
Okay. Well, there are a few different things. There are a few different places where you need to clarify the message. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about a recruiter. So I work with recruiters fairly regularly, and they've got two sales to make. One is to the candidate and one is to the client who's paying for that candidate.
Yes.
So they've got to keep two avatars in mind, and that's always fun. But with them, they need to, let's talk about the client side of that. With their funnels to get a client, a lot of times they're very outreach based. So their initial messaging needs to be on point. Their tipping point needs to be as early in their funnel as possible so that it goes from an outreach funnel into they're interested, now they're coming to me kind of process. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it takes a long time to get to that point in a funnel. It depends on what kind of funnel it is, but you want to push that as soon as you can reasonably and still not kill your numbers. And so all of that's about messaging and timing. And then you need your application process. You need your qualification process to frame things very well so that when you get into that discovery call or a series of discovery calls, even for enterprise type sales sometimes, then you're having the right conversation. So if you're not having the right conversation with people, then you're not going to make any sales. You can't turn a non-prospect into a prospect just by wanting them to be. You have to make sure that you've qualified the right people.
Absolutely. So how do you go from that total stranger to building up enough trust to go into a discovery call?
Well, there are a lot of people that talk about the know, like, trust factors. Mm-hmm. And I don't really like those. I prefer to talk about reach, relevance, and resonance. And they kind of handle the know, like, trust stuff for you when you get those right. But reach is making sure that you're talking to the right people. You have the right people in front of you in the first place. You have access. It's all about access to the right audience.
Right.
And knowing that you have access, you kind of need to know that you're talking to those right people. And then the relevance is, are you solving a problem that they need solved? It goes beyond just the right people that can buy your stuff. But are you obviously solving a problem? Do they know that you're solving a problem that's relevant to them?
Right.
And then resonance, are you solving it in a way that resonates with them? Now, a lot of times, no like trust never hurts. It never hurts
Yes.
because that's a part of a foundation for a relationship, but it's not everything. I think that the reach, relevance, and resonance is a lot more important for making sure that your marketing gets you into the right conversation in the first place.
Okay, so let's break that down a little bit. Know, like, trust. So the know and the like lead to trust.
Sometimes, maybe.
Sometimes maybe, but
my contention is that does not happen a lot of times. Knowing
So let me
someone,
go.
liking somebody, there's a lot of ways of trusting and trusting their intentions. Okay, that's fine.
Mhm.
I can trust someone's intentions without trusting their judgment or their skill set or their discretion at all. And it's a lot harder to trust someone's judgment than it is to trust that they're just, they mean well by me. And so I'm not a big fan of the no like trust for that kind of reason. I just don't think it covers nearly enough ground.
Going back to that, so know and like leads to trust and a certain amount of trust, and it depends on the context. But reach, relevance, and resonance basically build up the trust that we want because you're actually connecting with people, what they want, what their problems are, you're solving it. So we're still going for the same factor at the end, but you just do it more strategically and more purposefully because ultimately it's about the person you're talking to and not the fake of, hey, you're going to know me, you're going to like me, and we'll get a little bit of trust. This is more like by having the three that you're saying, you actually go into a much deeper conversation.
I believe so. Yeah. It's very much more them focused. And people like it when you focus on them. They trust you when you focus on them. They don't care to know you when you're focused on them. They know themselves. They know their problem that they're trying to solve. You can get to know each other later plenty of times. But I think that accurately sums it up. Thank you.
And I think just very much so, connecting with people in that way kind of reminds me of a saying that I had heard once. It was like, do you know why God invented fleas? To give dogs something to do. And I think what this reach, relevance, and resonance does is it gives salespeople something to do. So rather than flailing around on, oh, you and I went to the same college or some other kind of desperation, this is more like reach. How do I know I'm reaching the right people in the right way? It gives them something to do. And it gives them some thought behind the call they're about to make, a relevance. I need to know what your problem is. I need to know that I'm solving it, and I need to know that it's important to you because you probably have a lot of problems, Jeremy, that you don't care about, but some that you're deeply passionate about. And then, of course, that resonance. So I think it's a brilliant technique that you've got that lets mere mortals become master salespeople.
Well, strong words, but thank you. I'll take it.
Absolutely. So we've got a conversation with someone. We're talking about these things. And where do we go next?
Well, in our sales call overhaul process, we talk about a few. We actually grade a discovery call on 9 different axes internally.
Wow. Interesting.
And some of those are simple. Like we have one called misfires. And that's just, are you talking over people? Are you having a technology issue that's causing you to interrupt each other or some kind of lag? And we experience this all the time with Zoom and podcasting and the remote workspace. But if you're out of sync with your prospective client and they are not accustomed to it, or if it's just so bad, hey, if you have these problems 5 times in a row, deal with your technology and move on. That's not an acceptable thing to be letting it get in the way of your sales. If you miss a sale every other week because of bad technology, spend another $50 a month and get the right technology for you, or upgrade your internet connection or whatever.
Stop right there just for a second, Jeremy,
sure.
Because what you're saying is common sense, but you and I both know there's lots of salespeople out there and other people in just, the general world. There'll be a problem that's solvable, but for whatever reason, they won't solve it. Why do you think people get to that place of, it's the connection, it's my message, that's more important, and we convince ourselves not to take those small actions that get in the way of us connecting in a deeper way and actually getting people over the finish line?
I think that the reason a lot of people don't pay attention to these things is that they're accustomed to accepting the world around them and just, oh, well, that's how it is. That's how Zoom is, or that's how my phone system is. And that's not okay. You just have to be willing to say, no, any problem is fixable, and I'm going to take the responsibility for fixing that. But it's almost like our brains just gloss over it on a subconscious level. And so just bringing that back up to people's attention, yes, it's absolutely common sense. And yet, it's almost like people forget to think about it. But it can be a big factor in missing sales. I mean, that can, goodness, if your internet is unreliable, for instance, that can kill your sales for the day because of the stress that it puts you under. So, yeah, that's why that's the first thing that we talk about.
Subtly. Absolutely. So we were talking about avatars earlier on, but I think it's a really useful tool from the place I come from, is if you're a one-person show, oftentimes you're seeing the world in one particular place. So my wife, she was very detail focused. And when I went to do Umar things, she would go, no, this needs to be better. That needs to be better. You can't do this to people. So if you don't have a spouse that's doing that for you, or a manager, what you need to do is figure out who is that one person out there that would operate at a higher level. Even if you don't know them, people have a good sense of how Steve Jobs would see it. All you need to do is, what would Elon Musk do? Or maybe you had a coach in high school. How would Coach Jones see this? He'd say, get off your ass and fix that thing. And sometimes just being able to kind of see what you're doing through whoever your mentor's eyes are is a simple tool to kind of correct the things that need correcting.
I like that technique. Todd Herman talks about that in his alter ego book. Just
interesting.
Put on an alter ego, and who can answer this kind of question? Who can do things the way you want to do things there? And I like that. When I'm saying client avatar, typically what I mean...
it was totally different. I got what you meant. I was just using that general idea. I was actually coaching this one gentleman that works for this company. Is like, so tell me what you do. And he was like, well, what we do is boring, 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 boring. I said, okay, just for a second, put on the mask of your CEO, who I happen to know was very charismatic and a great communicator. He goes, okay. I said, put on his mask. Now tell me what you do. We are da 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 da. And it was just magic came out of his mouth. And it was just by the illusion of putting on the mask of the CEO. So we know the answers in here, but sometimes we let how we think about ourselves dictate how we show up, and we don't need to do that.
Yeah. That's a big part of what we like to deal with as well, is the mindset behind the problems. A lot of times we'll see technical problems on a sales call. Oh, don't say that. Say this instead. Don't frame things this way. Frame it that way instead. But then the second call rolls around in the package, and they do it again on the second call. And so that means, there's some fear in the way of saying the right things, or there's some resignation, like this isn't going to work out anyway, or some kind of a money thermostat issue where people are they've kind of given up before they even started, so that they don't have to be afraid about it later on. So most of the time it comes down to a fear. And so we have to address that really specifically and really thoroughly to make sure. But I find that most of the time people are missing a couple of things in their sales calls. They're missing a really good agenda with upfront contracts and being able to set the stage safely for the prospect. So when you have good upfront contracts with the prospect, that often refers to locking or trying to lock in a prospect to making a decision at the end of the call.
Yes.
Maybe that's appropriate. Maybe it's not. It really depends. But most of the time, it should be about making the prospect feel safe to be honest with you.
Yes.
And once they're safe being honest with you, then you can both relax and let the tension grow the way it ought to instead of pressure. Pressure and tension are very, very different things. As anyone who has ever been in a romantic situation understands viscerally. Pressure is not the same thing as tension. You need tension. You should not ever have pressure. And so that's one of the big things that I find is fear-based, unless it's just a bad habit, is pressure versus tension. So eliminate the pressure and let everything rest on tension.
One of the things I find is there's three places where people get stuck. One is a limiting belief somewhere in their unconscious. Because if they knew what the belief was that's getting in the way, most people go, oh, that's dumb. That maybe made sense when I was 4. It doesn't make sense now. But a lot of that stuff's hidden. The second way is something called inner conflict, where one part of them knows that I'm going to do exactly what Jeremy said. This is the right way. But there's another part of their psyche that basically goes, oh, it's wrong to talk about money, or you're not good enough. And one of the ways to uncover that is when they're talking about what they want to do. It's like, Jeremy, I know I'm going to do this. This week's going to be different. Strong voice, strong gestures. Then this hand comes up. But I don't want to be bothering people, and the tone of their voice changes, and the second hand comes up and it's got weaker gestures. As soon as you see that, okay, two parts of the psyche are at war, getting in the way. And then the third place is something I call hot wiring, where if I was on stage, I would, this part of the presentation, go find some young female in the audience and go and say, hi, my name's Umar. I put out my hand to shake her hand, and she would shake my hand unconsciously. She's shaken hands a million times before, but her reptile brain is looking for, is this safe to shake that person's hand? So there's a bunch of processing going on in the background. And the same thing happens in sales sometimes, where they get this inner process that comes up that sabotages their efforts. So they go back to the default old way of doing things and not the new way. So once you get people over the fear, how do you get them over the fear?
Oh, it depends. I do not prescribe a technique before only rarely, and it's unusual in these days of Zoom. Yeah, but typically we're looking at a lot of different techniques. I mean, the NLP toolbox and various other. We've got several mindset coaches in the program.
Nice,
and so they use whatever technique they want. I do not limit them because I found that the saying, "People is policy." You get really good people in and you let them do their thing, and they do. They can. It's safe to have initiative in that kind of program. And so they've got backup. If they need backup with someone, then I can hop in and help out, or one of the other coaches can hop in and help out as well. But most of the time, I don't even need to get into that stuff. I mean, we'll use all kinds of techniques for resolving things, though, from processes that look vaguely similar to the core transformation type stuff from Connie Ray Andreas to anything from the NLP toolbox. Tony Robbins loves the circle of excellence kind of stuff. And all that and the alter ego kind of thing is fun as an instant hijack for helping someone just understand there are more possibilities than what they've been using. But the visual squash technique is one of my personal favorites because of exactly the kind of thing that you talked about with the, on the one hand, on the other hand, we just take that so literally with the visual squash and we say, okay, well, let's resolve it. Let's put those hands literally together. Oh, yeah. And it's just beautiful to see all the weird faces people make while you do that stuff too.
What's kind of interesting, at least from my point of view, is that you can have two people come in with the exact same problem. They can articulate it the same way. And this technique is going to work really well with person A, and another technique is going to work with person B. And it's just goes back to that cold call you talked about. It's our ability to connect with the other human being where you just kind of pick up the vibe. It's like, oh, for Jeremy, it's going to be this. And for Jane, it's going to be that. And so there isn't one solution for everybody. And that's what I like about what you're doing is you've got different coaches, different techniques. Just go play, go figure out what's going to work best.
Right. We make sure that someone can handle the technical side of the sales. Once they can handle the technical side, then that buys them time to deal with other mindset stuff. And our mindset coaches are welcome to keep on working with our clients afterwards. That's totally fine. But during the program, we're making sure that they can hit the 9 points and do really well in a sales call. And I mean, that buys them time, it buys them money so that they can afford to do whatever they need to do later on. But that, just giving them the option, giving them that springboard right off the bat, that's just so powerful. And where most people are falling down is either in framing the call well. Mm-hmm. They're either a lot of newer people in the high ticket sales world that I've kind of come from over the past few years. It's not really all that high ticket for enterprise sales, for instance. This is pretty low ticket stuff. But most of the time when it's micro B2B or micro business to small consumers or coaching programs, we're talking about, $3,000 to $25,000, things like that. So in that world, there's a lot of people who come in and they learn a script and they learn a particular method that everybody seems to use, and who knows where it come from. Maybe it's a ClickFunnels type thing, but it's sort of it's very easy to inject arrogance into that situation, into that frame, and trying to over authoritize yourself instead of being a relaxed peer. And you can come in and frame it weakly, and you can come in and frame it over strongly, and making sure that you've got a good frame, a frame with integrity is very important. And that's probably the trickiest thing, psychology-wise, in these calls. But then, once
tricky, how so?
It requires more learning than some of the other things. More learning, and it's not particularly hard emotionally for the salesperson to do. It just requires a little bit more subtlety than some other things. So I guess it requires more subtlety is what I mean by tricky. And then the other place where they typically are going awry is by not getting to the emotional, not really getting any emotional oomph into that call. I guess there's one other place. This is turning into a Monty Python Spanish Inquisition sketch, isn't it? Four main rules of the Spanish Inquisition. But
what have the Romans ever done for us?
Exactly. So, aside from a poor frame and lack of emotional horsepower, getting weird about the close, asking for the sale. It's so important to be explicit about this is the sale. This is the decision to be made. What do you want to do? And it doesn't have to be complex. That should be very simple, way simpler than most people make it. But I find a lot of people are coming into these calls with this adversarial or this hiding kind of mentality. And so they hide from the big topics. They hide from the elephants in the room. They refuse to raise their own objections, and they wait trembling for a prospect to raise an objection. And then they've got their scripts for rebutting those objections and things like this. And, I hope it works. What do you mean you hope it works? Come on, why don't you just talk about it first? If it's something you're concerned about, talk about it before the prospect does. And you'll relax yourself tremendously. And then you'll take off the pressure and you'll let tension pull you both along through that call. And it's so much nicer that way. I can give you an example in a minute after this question if you want.
Sure. I'll give you one first, then we'll get your example. I'm going to go back to Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. Mm-hmm. It's like when it first came up, if he had said, "Yep, I had sex with her. I feel really bad about it," would have been done right up front rather than denial. You know it's going to come out at some point, and it just creates this big, hairy, scary thing where if you just talk about the issue that's there, no one dies. When you don't talk about it,
embarrassed.
You're going to die at the end.
Mm-hmm. He would have been embarrassed, but he wouldn't have been impeached.
Yeah, and not that he had any less embarrassment being on the stand and going through like months and months of this. And so we can all learn lessons from that. But you had an example too you were about to share.
Well, one of the things inside a sales call, when you're having a serious call, like the decision call or a strategy call, a discovery call, things like that, then there are so many times when a nervous salesperson can relax themselves by just co-opting their prospect. And it's so easy to do. For instance, if I have something that I'm worried about, say it's how long it takes me to deliver or my price. A lot of people get hung up on price. Let's talk about that one. So if I were concerned about price and I know I'm going to have a little trouble in the close later on. Oh, excuse me. I've got a delivery apparently. So if I've got if I've got an issue that I know about, then I need to bring that up. And I'll just say, do you mind if we talk about money first? I am not the world's smoothest salesperson and I'm getting all weird about it. Can we just talk about that so I can relax later on? And they'll always say yes.
So let's pause there just for a second. And what you suggested, of course, is brilliant.
I do need to pause. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So Jeremy, that's brilliant. Talking about, what you're nervous about up front, a lot of people see that as a sign of weakness, but it really isn't. It's just basically saying, hey, this is what's going on for me. And it makes you human and people want to save people. People want to help people. I was at this wedding before COVID hit. And the priest that was about to do the ceremony said, Father so-and-so was supposed to do this, but he couldn't make it. So I'm doing it. And I just graduated from seminary school 2 weeks ago. And this is my first wedding. And 300 people in the wedding, in the church applauded him, said, hey, no worries. And he did a phenomenal job. He got the worry out of the way. And had he been worried about it, he would have screwed up 3 or 4 times. But because he got it out of the way, just go on and do a great job. So if that's your biggest problem, bring it up front. Makes perfect sense.
Ah, wonderful. It was not a delivery. It was a pickup. So, all right. What was the last thing that we got?
Oldie but it. I often think about, since the dawn of time, I can imagine the marketplace in Egypt 5,000 years ago, and some guy's selling camels better than the other camel dealer. And the third camel dealer is like, hey, I got to figure out what that guy's doing. And hey, Ahmed, what are you doing? These conversations had to have happened a long time ago. And he's like, hey, I get nervous about camel pricing, so I bring it up front. I don't think anything much has changed in the grand. Technology has changed, but the human condition has not.
Right.
They don't exist.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's one of the most powerful tools that, like easy hijack kind of tools that I've been able to teach people. And it comes from Sandler sales. I mean, it's an old school kind of thing, almost as old as an LP. But it's so
I do something similar where I tell people what my superpower is the ability to create a safe place between me and Jeremy that lets Jeremy go on a journey. And then whatever the tools are don't really make a difference. I could have the best tools in the world, but if I don't have that safety, that trust, they may work for a little while, they may not. But if I've got a massive amount of trust, I can say, hey, Jeremy, let me tell you this fable. And it could be just a fable that's quite silly, could do the trick, and you'd be happy, I'd be happy, and it would change your life forever. So at the end of the day, we're human beings. We need to connect. Jeremy, thank you so much for being on the show. And let me tell you what I really, really appreciated about our conversation is that you have no new ideas, except the most important idea, which is to value the person you're connecting with, of building those connections with them, bridges with them, and creating that connection. And certainly going back to the first thing you said about reach, relevance, resonance is all about honoring the person you're talking to and really connecting with them in that way. So thank you for reminding everyone that we need to realize as a human being on the other side, and what's the best way I can be of service to them.
Yeah, that'll be my pleasure. I've got a list that I'm building right now that I'd be happy to share with you. And thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. And if you're looking for more tools, go to my website at nolimitselling.com. I've got a free mind training course there that's going to teach you some insights from the world of neuro-linguistic programming, and that is the fastest way to get better results.